I know you're going to screw me up. I knew you were going to screw me up.
Hang on, we're getting set up now. That's what it said on the screen.
I know. I do that on purpose. So, hey, you're on Lunch Conversations with Randy and Teddy. For those who don't know, I'm Teddy, and the other guy in the blue shirt waving his hand and trying to beckon for the barmaid is Randy Wooden.
Wait a minute. We both have blue shirts on. We're both named Randy.
You were the only one beckoning for the barmaid at that moment. So,
okay.
Our special guest today is Randy Collins. We'll tell you about him in a minute. We're grateful for all of you to show up. Lunch Conversations with Randy and Teddy is sponsored by Blackwell Captive Solutions. Is your healthcare plan for your business your biggest spend? Do you want more power and greater transparency with your health plan for your business? Blackwell Captive Solutions equalizes the playing field, so your cost is not based on what insurance companies think they can charge you. Rather, Blackwell allows you to track every dollar for greater price transparency. Call Blackwell Captive Solutions today and tell them that Teddy Burriss told you to come see them. Boom, waka waka, we're here.
There we are.
Randy, would you introduce yourself to the audience?
I can, Teddy.
Let me introduce myself first so you can get your stuff done. So for those who've never met me before, I'm Teddy Burriss. I'm a LinkedIn strategist, trainer, and coach. I'm also a Google Workspace and Gmail trainer, teaching people how to use those two things as business tools. I do one-on-one training, corporate training. I do seminars and webinars and public speeches. I have YouTube channels. I stand on the street corner and proselytize about the power of these tools. Reach out to me if you ever want to say hi one day. Randy Wooden, would you introduce yourself?
Pretty impressive, Teddy. Did your wife write that for you? I don't know. Anyway, hey, it's another Wednesday, folks, and going to have a great conversation. But first, a quick introduction. Randy Wooden with Goodwill Industries of Northwest North Carolina. I'm the director for our professional center based in Winston, but I have clients across the country. So if you happen to be in a job search, or maybe you know somebody who is and could be struggling, reach out, find me on LinkedIn, we'll get you on the calendar. Everything's free. We don't charge you anything. Can't beat that, can you, Teddy? That's pretty good deal.
It is pretty good too. It comes with a biscuit and gravy as well, right?
Randy Collins is our guest, and I'll do a brief introduction of him. But really what I want to do is kind of outline some of the topics we're going to talk about today. And then I'll throw it to Randy to introduce himself in more detail, but also too, reminder, if you've got comments or questions for Randy Collins, put them in the chat till you keep an eye on that. But so Randy is a former CEO and executive director for Mt Airy Chamber of Commerce. And we're here to talk about doing business in Mayberry. A lot of Andy Griffith fans out there. We have a lot of local folks that are going to be watching, but Andy Griffith is, if I dare say, is the term ubiquitous, but he's all over the place, right? Everybody across the globe has heard of Andy Griffith. Well, most everybody, let's put it that way. So we're going to talk some trivia about that, but really kind of also focus on the challenges of marketing a small town from a Chamber of Commerce standpoint to businesses. How do you do that? What are some challenges that you face? What are some successes you've had? But also we'll get a scoop on how Mayberry came to be and the whole Andy Griffith story. So we're going to have some fun today, folks. Going to learn a little bit along the way. But first, Randy, why don't you introduce yourself in a little bit more detail?
Well, thank you, Randy. It's always a pleasure to be amongst another Randy.
I know it's the highlight of our time. So
that's enough of that crap.
We are a
mutual admiration,
and I dare say, if Teddy should win the lottery and move somewhere to like Bermuda, we could do like the Randy and Randy show. But I digress. You guys are awesome. I've seen your shows before, and it's a pleasure to be on with you today. I'm Randy Collins. I make my home near Pilot Mountain, North Carolina. Recently just left my position as the president CEO of the Greater Mt Airy Chamber of Commerce. My career, I've had 35 years in nonprofit association chamber work, and I've loved it. Wouldn't really do anything else. Seeking my next new challenge, taking a little time off and doing some consulting with some chambers. and met up with Randy through the Goodwill organization, and been a great help to me. But helping businesses, working in the Chamber of Commerce field, and helping to build communities has been my life. I've served 6 chambers in 35 years, so I enjoy it very much. We make our home in the region still, and looking forward to talking to you today about a question that's near and dear to my heart, and that's Mayberry.
Mayberry it is. Always ask the why question. You said you've been in this line of work for most all of your professional career.
Right.
A big chunk of it. So you've got to, I assume, have some passion for that and a real drive that keeps you going. What's your why?
Oh boy. I think working with entrepreneurs, helping people build an idea from concept to reality, to be a catch-all in a community of helping not only business owners, but citizens, government officials. It's a job that does a lot of different types of things. It's never boring. It's challenging. It's stressful. We did a lot of events, but frankly, working with the business owners and trying to help them with concerns that they have in their business, and making sure they get to the right person. I always build the chamber as a place, Chamber of Commerce, and some of your people out there that might be listening that are not familiar with the chamber, they're different in every community. There's some 7,000 chambers in the United States alone and all over the world. The Chamber of Commerce to me is a place where a business can call when they don't know who to call. And they get into trouble with something, or they need help with something. And then I find people that can help them.
Yeah. And especially maybe since COVID, but I think even before COVID, I think people in general, and perhaps even businesses, maybe aren't as apt to want to associate or join associations and be part of clubs and service organizations like maybe they were a generation ago. I don't know if you're seeing that's the same kind of trend you've seen with recruiting businesses and retaining them as chamber members.
Well, it depends on the times we're in. When times are a little wacky like they are now, and the economy what it is, we've seen the trends in membership actually go up because they need us more. They need to do more marketing. They need to do more outreach. They need to be on social media, and on and on and on and on. I've had the pleasure of serving chambers during boom time when they don't need you as bad. So membership is that ever changing and flowing, and but it's also a generational thing. The millennials, I think, need us less, or maybe have different needs than that of the war babies and the baby boomers, who joining a Chamber of Commerce was kind of the thing to do. We've got to return value to the members. And by the way, most chambers are not funded with public money. We raise our own money.
Yeah. So Mt Airy, for those that aren't familiar with Mt Airy, if you had to kind of describe it on a map, where would you? We've got folks here from all across the country watching now and also later, and they may have heard of Mt Airy and Mount Pilot. Okay. But whereabouts are you in the state of North Carolina?
Well, if you're familiar with the Triangle of Virginia, that has a straight line on the bottom and a kind of a bumpy line around, the state right below it, North Carolina, where those two states meet, you go just below the state line of the Commonwealth of Virginia. The first city that you'll hit on the interstate to the western part of the state will be Mt Airy. So if you come down from, let's say, the Roanoke area of I-95, you take 77 south, the first city you're going to hit is Mt Airy, North Carolina. And I should point out there's a Mt Airy, Maryland, there's a Mt Airy, Georgia, there is a Mt Airy, Florida. So Mt Airy is a name that's utilized in other areas of the country. So we are what's called the Northwest North Carolina. And but it's a small community. The city is about 10,000 people. The county We're in the county of Surrey, Surry. And yeah, it's a fairly rural, if compared to other cities like Winston, where you guys are in a Winston-Salem area, or Greensboro or Charlotte. It's a small rural county and a fairly small city.
And how far are you from, let's say, Winston?
Yeah, 25 miles, 30
Okay.
miles. And we're about an hour south of Roanoke.
Mhm.
And then if you go east, we're a couple of hours from the 95 corridor. Go west, you're into the mountains, into the Smokies and the Appalachians. So it's a beautiful part of the South. We encourage people to come and see it.
Yeah. So a little, and again, if you have comments or questions for Randy Collins, put them in the chat. Maybe some trivia that could stump him. I don't know. As well, we may get to that too. Who knows? But
bring it
the
on.
history of Mount Airy. So I'm sure you've given this talk many, many times, but help us understand the history of Mount Airy, North Carolina.
Well, in a brief, I could talk all day on it, but I'll be brief. And that is because I'm a history guy. I've studied a lot of it. And this area of Northwest North Carolina predates Columbus, if it's hard to fathom that. 1200, 1300, there were nomadic tribes of Indians in this valley. Of course, some of your listeners and you guys might be aware of the Cherokees that were here in the western part of the state. There's a city called Cherokee, North Carolina. It's actually a part of the Cherokee Reservation. But there were Indians here, nomadic tribes, back 1200, 1300 in the history before the major cities were ever settled. But Mount Airy became kind of a stop between Galax, Virginia, and Winston-Salem on that ragged road, or how people traveled by horseback. We were a halfway point between Galax and Winston. So people stopped, got their stuff that they needed. Maybe they stayed overnight, watered the horses or whatever. So Mount Airy grew from very, very humble beginnings. But, the downtown area of Mount Airy has businesses that were near 100 years old. So it started off as sort of a coach stop, if you will. One of the first big businesses that opened, there is a granite quarry located in Mount Airy.
Okay.
Many people may not know that Mount Airy was called the Granite City. And just east of the downtown area is a white granite open face mine, quarry, if you will. And I wish I used to have a piece of it around here somewhere. I should have brought it out, but
Eddie probably has one in his drawer of goodies over there. He's got you name. He's like going on Let's Make a Deal, and remember you used to pay $5 for a stapler. Well, Teddy would make bank on that one. Hey, where did Mount Airy actually get its name? Do you know where the name Mount Airy came from?
Well, there's, I believe that the history that I was told, the books that I've read, that it was named after one of the local estates in the area. I don't want to call it necessarily a plantation, but a large area that was privately owned, and the name of the estate was Mount Airy. Others have told me that it was named because it is in what they call the foothills, so that you get this breeze that comes through down out of the mountain ranges and goes south. But that's my recollection of the name. But so the quarry opened 1889 and is still functioning today. Quick story on the quarry. Farmer bought the land, tried to farm it, couldn't farm it, was mad because he said there are too many rocks. Well, so he sold the thing for pennies on a dollar. A guy brought in some digging equipment. We're talking about the late 1880s, early 1890s, discovered this white granite stone, and the rest is history. The engineers have said that there's at least 100 years of granite still left in the ground, and you can go out and see the quarry today. If you're ever in the Outer Banks of North Carolina and go to the Wright Brothers Memorial, it's a beautiful white granite memorial. That is from Mount Airy granite, and it's beautiful white granite with black speckles in it. So, furniture factories began to open in the 1880s. Of course, textile mills came, like a lot of places in North Carolina. And, so the industry grew. And, but overall, up into the turn of the century of 1900, up into the 30s and 40s, and frankly, up into the 80s, Mount Airy became an industrial economy. But the biggest industry, and it still is here today, is agriculture. A lot of farmers still here, beef cattle, chickens, vegetables. So agriculture is still a big part of the economy in the Mount Airy region.
About how many people there now? Ballpark live there?
70,000 in the county, 10,000 in the city of Mount Airy. And within the county, you have the town of Pilot Mountain, the town of Dobson, North Carolina, which is a county seat for Surrey County, and the city of Elkin, North Carolina. So you have some cities and towns within the county of Surrey, Mount Airy being the largest.
I got you. All right. Well, let's pivot a little bit. And if we have other follow-up on the history of Mount Airy, if you think about it and you want to work it in, that's great. So let's move to another point here, and that is Andy Griffith and his connection to the town. And I assume you say the town of Mount Airy. And again, if you have comments or questions, or you want to stump our guest with a trivia question, Teddy will keep an eye on some of that stuff. We'll see if we can, see if we can ring the bell with that one. So,
hey, I'm happy to take on all of the questions, but Andy Griffith was the Griffiths moved here in the 20s, and Andy Griffith was born in it's hard to believe 1926. He was born in Mount Airy. He comes from humble roots. His father worked in the Mount Airy furniture factory, which sadly years ago burned down. But a lot of the Mount Airy furniture is still around. But of course, furniture is synonymous with North Carolina, a lot of furniture factories. First time Andy spoke on stage was at his elementary school in Mount Airy and sang a song to a small group of people at age 8. And that elementary school now is the Andy Griffith Museum and the Surrey Arts Council. And if any of you are interested in come to Mount Airy, if you don't do anything else in Mount Airy and you're an Andy Griffith fan, the one stop you have to make is the Andy Griffith Museum. And I could talk about that more later, but
not Floyd's Barbershop.
Well, I'll talk about that too. Yeah, Floyd's Barbershop would be a place to go, and other places. So Andy grew up here, and suffice it to say, and I will put a disclaimer in here. There are people who are better experts at Andy Griffith than I am, and some people who may be better experts may have a different version of a story or piece of information. Let me know where I might miss one. I by no means consider myself an expert in it, but Andy does tell a story that he feels that he came from the other side of the tracks and was not treated well in the community. Mount Airy had some wealthy families, and he felt that he was kind of pushed around as a little kid, and said that being on the stage and doing comedy and doing music was a way for him to break out of some bullying that he experienced as a kid. He discovered music in Mount Airy at the local Moravian church. The pastor taught him how to play the trombone and other instruments. But Andy's gift, although his college degree was in music, was comedy. He started as a comedian, and of course developed the television show and all that. That's a long story. The most successful television show, ran for 8 seasons, and still played in syndication today, all over the world. And there are people that still come here to Mount Airy because of Andy Griffith. So the connection is definitely there. but let me say this quickly and then we'll move on, is that when the NAFTA Act came in and a lot of the manufacturing jobs went overseas, it was the town fathers and other people, not necessarily Andy Griffith involved at this point. Andy died in 2012. The town fathers said, well, I think we could do something with this Mayberry thing, because Andy did say that parts of the show and the ideas that him and Danny Thomas and Sheldon Leonard and others came up with the show did come from his time here as a child and growing up here. And then some did not. So there are people that believe that a lot of the show was filmed here. Nothing related to the show on television was filmed in Mount Airy, North Carolina. Not that I'm aware of, and never was. It was filmed on a back lot of the Desilu Studios in Southern California.
Randy,
And,
have you ever been on the Desilu Studios?
You know, they called and wanted me to show there and, you know, test the pilot for him. But I just said, I got this show I do with this Burriss guy. I said, I can't be there. I
Yeah, your contract precludes you from doing that. Hey,
Yeah.
Randy C., hang on a minute.
Sure.
I have an answer to the question. Somebody asked, how did Ron Howard meet Andy Griffith? And I know the answer. Do you know the answer?
I know a version of a story that I heard, but I'd be interested in your version, Teddy.
My version is straight from the most trusted resource in the world, and that would be Google. And bottom line, he just auditioned for the role. Do you know something different?
Correct. Well, Ron Howard's dad,
Yeah.
Rance was his name, R-A-N-C-E, who played some bit parts, by the way, in the show. If you remember the episode when the governor came to shake Barney's hand, the driver of the governor's limo was Rance Howard. So you'll see Rance that plays very bit parts. But yes, he was called out on an audition and did well. And you remember as well that Ron's brother was also in the show, but had no speaking roles. He was Leon, that ran around with a cowboy suit on and a peanut butter sandwich. Now, come on. Come on, are you guys Andy fans or what?
I got to confess, you know, if I've watched 10 Andy Griffith episodes in my life, I'd be shocked. They just,
well, I tell you what.
It was never on. I grew up in Rhode Island, so we didn't relate to the country living kind of thing, I guess. Same thing with the Waltons and, you know, Little House on a Prairie and all that stuff.
It's a cultural thing. But yeah, if you ever have a bad day, and you're done with the world, kind of like what happened after 9/11. A lot of people turned to I Love Lucy and different things. Andy Griffith is a great show to put on when you're having a bad day.
You know, I think impressed me, and you know, I kind of joking about the 10 episodes. I think I've seen a few more than that, but each show had a lesson.
Yes,
you walk away with a lesson, and a positive lesson versus you know, crime pays.
Now, Dean is offering one more tip about Ron Howard. There was a dude named Clint Howard. Was that Ron's another brother?
That was Dean. You're correct. There is that. Clint. And Clint has been to Mount Airy. Ron Howard, I understand, has never visited Mount Airy that I'm aware of. Many of the cast did visit, and Andy visited many times, but not as often as people thought he did. After he moved his parents back to the West Coast and bought them a home after he became famous. And so his mother and dad relocated out of the area, but Andy still has a lot of cousins and family connections in the area. No doubt.
And one last one. Dale seems to think that I have some resemblance to Gomer Pyle. Dale, you're not quite right. Otis is the dude that I aspire to be.
Otis.
Otis, town drunk, but hey, you got to be famous for something.
All right, so
take us out of this, buddy.
Yeah. So Andy Griffith, it's kind of cut his teeth, if you will, with theater and with comedy and music and that as a kid. So he had the opportunity and he took advantage of that. So kudos to him. I guess I wonder too, just, how do people get discovered? These overnight sensations, and they, how did he make the leap from there to stardom?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
The story that I've read,
Yeah.
and by the way, some people might be saying, golly, there's so much information about Andy Griffith. If you go on wherever you buy your books, online or in a bookstore, there are many books written on this topic. Find one of them. I've read all of them. Some agree to disagree, but I understand Andy Griffith was discovered in a comedy club in New York City by the producer of the show, the late Sheldon Leonard. Andy did a country act, and he was famous for a story that he created called What It Was Football. And it is a country boy's story, having never seen a college football game. And it is, if you like country humor, not everybody does, you would love. So if you just YouTube or Google What It Was Football and Andy Griffith, it is a very funny story. So comedy, yes, was his first love. And I should say, Andy stayed in Mount Airy until he left for the University of North Carolina and to get his degree. Music was a degree area of his, and also he did study for the ministry. And I believe his minor or one of his musical majors was in choral or choir work. So if you notice in the show, he does have a great voice and he can play multiple instruments. So I guess he had thought down the road of being involved in church or involved in music in some way. And music, as you know, was always a part of the 8 seasons of the Andy Griffith Show. Mostly bluegrass, the old country bluegrass stuff, and was done very well.
Do other, you mentioned he has a lot of cousins and so forth. So are there relatives of his that still live in the Mount Airy area? And
I've been told, yes.
Yeah.
And Andy's mother was her family was located north of Mount Airy, actually into Virginia along the Blue Ridge Parkway, because there is a place called Mayberry up near the Blue Ridge Parkway. And one author said they believe that's where the name for the show came from, or the town, because they couldn't call it Mount Airy, in the show.
I think here we go.
But the show also brought about. Yeah, go ahead. I think the show also brought around some wonderful actors. Yeah. Everybody agrees that Don Knotts was the hit of the show, and Andy even admitted that publicly. Andy was a comedian, but Andy became the straight guy when Don Knotts joined the cast. Yeah. One of the funniest men from West Virginia, by the way. Don Knotts grew up in Morgantown, West Virginia. One of the funniest comedic actors that ever was, up in the area of Charlie Chaplin or any of the big ones. And Frances Bouvier, who played Aunt Bee, another great actress. And she is buried actually not too far from Mount Airy. And Andy, by the way, was we'd hoped that he would be buried in Mount Airy, but he wasn't. That was the only thing we didn't have of Andy Griffith, is Andy had thought to be buried here, but the family decided to bury him in Mania on the Outer Banks on his estate. So unfortunately, you can't go there. Apparently, his widow did not want his gravesite to be a tourist attraction.
Got it. Yeah.
And so Andy rests is still in his native North Carolina.
Halfway through the show, Teddy, you want to tackle the halfway?
Yeah, let's do that. Randy C., thanks for being on the show. We got a lot yet to talk about Mount Airy, and we'll move into doing business in Mount Airy. Our sponsor is Blackwell Captive Solution. We've known them for a long time now. They have more than 25 years experience in health insurance business. Their medical stop loss captive is easy to implement and works like a shock absorber for high dollar medical claims of your employees. So if you got a business, you know somebody's got a business and they need stopgap insurance, if they're self-insured, give blackwellcaptive.com, blackwellcaptive.com. Reach out to them, give them a call, whatever. Tell them that Teddy Burriss said that you need to talk. Randy W., back at you.
Yeah. So I was, Teddy was talking about the source of all wisdom or all truth being Google. So I was on Facebook the other day, and there, I saw some post that was put out, and it had the clip of the very first skit, the very first Andy Griffith skit with Danny Thomas, where Thomas, he pulled him over for, speeding or whatever. And Thomas said, I know people, and I'm going to call the TV station and the whole deal. And here Andy is like, he's the newspaper editor. He's the justice of the peace. He's right. A sheriff. He's everything else. So I watched that. And in one of the comments that somebody put in there, and again, I don't know whether it's true or not. So I guess I saw it on Facebook. So I'm just vomiting what I saw. But originally there was not, Don Knotts wasn't part of this thing. He and I think Pat Harrington, is it? Right. The guy that was on One Day at a Time. He played the remember the superintendent, the guy with the mustache. They were in a hotel room waiting. They were in town or somewhere to do an audition for something. And they were apparently watched Danny Thomas's show that night, and Knotts or whatever said, hey, he needs a sidekick.
Correct.
Is that true? And they called Thomas, and I guess it all kind of worked out. Walk us through that. Is that true? And how did that all unfold?
Yeah, that's true. Andy
really?
and Don had met a few times, but didn't really know each other. But exactly right. Don had finished a project and approached Andy and said, great show, but you need a deputy. You need a deputy, and I'm willing to do it. And Andy said in interviews and everything that it worked right from the start, and it was a timing thing. Here's an interesting fact: as successful as the show was, Andy Griffith never won an Emmy.
Oh.
One of the most successful television shows in the history of television, the lead actor never won an Emmy. You know who won the Emmys?
Don Knotts.
Don Knotts. And the second Emmy for the show, Aunt B.
The kid, Aunt B, really?
Aunt B won an Emmy, and the only Emmy I believe she ever got. Now, some people say that Andy was upset by that, but listen, they all did well because of the show, and it was an unfortunate situation because Disney, made a great deal that Don couldn't turn down to go make some movies for Disney, Mr. Limpet and others that he had done, and Don left the show, and many people said the show was never the same, even with Pat Harrington and others that played the deputies and different things, but it was still a great show. Then, of course, the show ended in 1968. Then there was a roll-off called Mayberry RFD that ran, I think, for 2 seasons. And it was good, some of the same players, and Andy was still a part of it, but Don was no longer a part of it. So, it was television history. It's just a wonderful show that I still enjoy watching today.
Yeah, and they've so much crossover between, I'm making this up, I don't remember, but Gomer Pyle, you got Andy Griffith, you've got Petticoat Junction, you got Beverly Hillbillies.
Hillbillies, yeah.
You see the same guy in 4 or 5 of these things. Like, I know who that guy is. I've seen him on the whatever other show. It was Sheldon Leonard, or Sidney Sheldon.
Sheldon Leonard.
Sheldon Leonard was
right.
It was all under that umbrella with Desi Lou, I guess. Is that how all that came together? And
yeah, I mean, in those days, the sitcoms, the comedic shows were selling very well. Of course, the big one prior to that was I Love Lucy. The
Mhm.
first time, that 3 separate cameras were used in a show.
That was
What's a
their
fact?
doing. That was
Right.
Lucy and Desi put that together. They also put together that whole idea of taping so they can do reruns.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And another brilliant show, and, finally filmed in front of a live audience, where the Andy Griffith Show was not, was filmed on a sound set. I'll tell you a quick funny story, and
Yeah.
connecting to Mount Airy is that we get, the chamber does not run tourism, but we're part of that team that promotes the community, but we share a building with the visitor center. So I found myself in the visitor center quite often. And we would say, a guy came up to me one day, and I said, "Oh, are you visiting?" And he says, "Yeah, we drove here a long way to come see Mayberry." And I said, "Well, great. How can I help you?" And we gave him the brochures and whatnot. He said, "I just want to know, point me in the direction of Myers Lake." And I look at him and I said, "Myers Lake? You
Oops.
mean Myers Lake on the show, on the TV show, where Andy and Barney and Opie would go fishing?" He said, "Yeah, when the opening credits and Opie throws a rock into the lake,
Mhm.
which direction is the lake?" And I said, "I don't mean to bust your bubble. The show wasn't filmed in Mount Airy. That lake still exists outside of Los Angeles, and you can go there. It's a park, and see where those scenes were filmed." But, another lady called me one day, and my husband has some concerns. We're coming to Mount Airy. We love Andy Griffith, blah, blah, blah. We're a little concerned about the unpaved roads. And I said, "Okay, what's your concern?" "Well, watching the show, it seemed they're running down these roads and there's no blacktop. And we have a very nice automobile and we don't want to cause any problem with our car." And I said, "Ma'am, those roads, all of our roads in Mount Airy, North Carolina are paved." So, we've had people come to the visitor center dressed as the characters.
Yeah.
As people are obsessed with this show, as all great fans of all great television
Mhm.
shows are. But it is still as strong now. People say it's dying. That show is still as strong now as it was 30 years ago.
Yeah. Teddy, what you got?
Now there is a Lake Myers right outside of Moxville, North Carolina. So
There you go.
we could spin the internet and make it go, "Oh my golly, you guys know what you're talking about," and tie it to it. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I don't know if you can quantify this, or even if you could, whether you'd feel at liberty to do it or not. But how do you put a measure of dollars behind what Andy Griffith, Mayberry, and all of that has brought to Mount Airy over the years? And if he weren't there, I mean, you got Granite
Oh,
and you got. I
tobacco.
mean, I don't know that you have a heck of a lot, because that's what you hang your hat on. I mean, that you're a rural community that you're a destination, you're a tourist place now. But what if
Exactly.
that didn't exist? Yeah.
well, I'll tell you something.
Yeah.
It's just Randy Collins's opinion, and
Yeah.
some may disagree with me. If Andy Griffith had never been born in Mount Airy,
Yeah.
North Carolina, and was born in Ottumwa, Iowa, Mount Airy would be a much different place than what it is today.
Mhm.
But I will say this, Mount Airy sprung out of the jobs we lost in the textile industry. At that time, NAFTA was signed in 1992, something like that, by Bill Clinton, basically allowing these big manufacturers to move their manufacturing overseas. The Surrey County, Mount Airy lost some 15,000 jobs. People were out of work. So that's where I had mentioned before, the town fathers got together. Let's see if we could do something with this. And they built some industries around. The economic impact of Mount Airy, I think, is, and Mayberry, yeah, I'm sure has been done, but we're talking about 100,000 visitors a year for the past decade or more. I would certainly say that the impact of Andy Griffith in his hometown is in the tens of millions of dollars since his death, in 2012. And I would say this, as macabre as it sounds, the one thing we didn't have, if Andy had been buried in Mount Airy, you could double that.
Yeah.
For the same reason why a lot of people don't go to Memphis to see Graceland. They go to Memphis because the king of rock and roll is buried on that property. And it is a religious, almost mystical thing to Elvis fans to be in the presence of the king where he is.
Interesting.
Now,
yeah.
But we don't have Andy, and no, you can't go to see Andy, but he left behind, I would say, certainly the economic impact, Randy, is enormous over the past, since his the show went off the air over 50 years ago. I would say it would certainly be in the near hundreds of millions of dollars that have been generated. There is one business, and I won't name it, on Main Street that is Mayberry focused. They cleared $1 million plus in receipts last year.
In 2021, Surrey County's tourism industry recorded $31 million in 2021.
Right.
And that's tourism. Now, you can call it tourism for, Andy Griffith, or tourism for the, mushrooms.
Right. Well, I will also say some people, especially the younger people, will say that the Andy mystique is dying, that the people like me who idolized Andy, when Andy came on the air, I was just born that year, 1960. But from the mid 60s up through the end of his show, I watched him all the time, and certainly I still watch him. They believe that the people who loved him are dying off, so that the new people coming up are not as attracted. Other studies I've read is said that's simply not true. That with internet now and television that you can view over the waves, if you will, the internet, Andy Griffith will be forever with us. And I talk to many families whose children watch Andy Griffith. So they're certainly 50 years from now, will anybody remember Andy Griffith? Who's to say? The historians will write about that. But a huge economic impact to the city of Mount Airy, North Carolina, no doubt.
What are some things that the Mount Airy does to kind of perpetuate this? Did they have an Andy Griffith Day? Are there festivals? I mean,
Yes.
and again, you can, okay. So yeah. Plenty of things. People dress up, like characters, the business district.
Oh yeah. There's something in second week in September. If people go to visitmayberry.com is the website. It's not my website, by the way. That is the tourism website in Mount Airy. Visitmayberry.com. There's an event called Mayberry Days that happens in mid-September. It's 7 days long, and it is a celebration of everything Andy Griffith and everything Mount Airy. And people come. These are
Randy,
professional actors that come to town dressed as Floyd the barber, dressed as Aunt Bee, dressed as Barney, and it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of concerts, there's a lot of book readings, there's all different types of things.
Hey, Randy,
here's an interesting.
Let me ask another one, because Don asked this question. How about international tourism into the area, focused on the show? Do you remember seeing much international traffic?
Yeah, there were people from all over the world, certainly from Europe, from Great Britain, France, Germany. I met people from Asia, really all over the world. He was syndicated in various languages and still is, apparently. Here's an interesting spot, though, that I should tell before I forget, and that is at Mayberry Days or something else, the one person that you won't see impersonated will be Andy. And I asked that one time, because why do we not have somebody that plays Andy and walks up and down the street? Isn't that why people are here? Well, Andy's image and likeness is protected by copyright, by some family connections.
Mhm.
Viacom and the TV Land entity owns the rights. So, for instance, I'll give an example. I knew a business that used the image of Martin Luther King in an ad for Martin Luther King Day, and was sued by the King Foundation for unauthorized use of an image. Andy's image cannot be reproduced without the permission of the ownerships of that right. So now the other images, Aunt Bee, Barney, and others, are not as protected. So there are people that protect that image, for the reasons that people do that. But no, I think it reaches around the world. No doubt about that. He has a story that is universal.
I can relate to that. I have lawyers as well.
There we go. There we go. Sorry, Teddy, you have a face for radio. So that's the, I think I got Collins a joke on that one.
Yeah.
That's an old, that's an old radio joke, but
me and Teddy share something in common there.
right.
I definitely have a face for radio.
so, so if for people who've never been to Mount Airy and in that, I mean, for people who've watched the show, there's Floyd's Barber Shop and there's the
Deli.
restaurant. There's all the, again, I know the show wasn't filmed in Mount Airy, but on the lot where it shows. So if somebody travels to Mount Airy, are they going to see what I'll call replicates, or, they're going to see things replicated that were on the show and kind of make you feel like you're in Mayberry?
Well, one question that we got a lot was, they wanted to see the jail. Could you point me in the form of the courthouse that was in Mayberry, where a lot of the show was shot? Obviously, that building existed only on a movie lot, and sadly was destroyed and built over in the old Desilu lot, but also ironically also used in other Hollywood movies, if you look close enough. No, I think they'll see a lot of familiar things. Now, there is a business in Mount Airy that rebuilt a replica of the courthouse. It's actually very good.
Mhm.
That same business, or business next door, offers something called squad car tours. So they took the old Ford Galaxies, remade them as Andy's patrol car, and he has now a fleet of, are you ready? 11 of these things that drive around Mount Airy. And for a fee, you can get the 40-minute tour of Mayberry and Mount Airy. Quick story on the squad cars. Everybody remembers them. And as a kid, I thought the Ford Galaxy in the 60s was the hottest car in the world. If you remember, next time you watch the show, at the end of the show, you'll see a tag that says motor vehicles provided by Ford Motor Company. Ford every year gave Andy a new car. So starting with the episode in 60 or 61, 62, 63, all the way through the shows, every year you saw an upgraded Ford Galaxy. Here's the sad part. The cars that were taken away were destroyed.
Huh.
Oh, no.
And Ford would bring another one in, repaint it, put the siren on it, ready to go. I've been told that none of those exist. Because if you imagine, if you had a squad car from that show and put it on the auction block or eBay, but you can buy them today. So the tourists love getting in the old squad car and driving down Main Street. And I would usually run out and say, citizens arrest, that sort of thing.
I remember, I think I read somewhere where they took the rear window out of the squad cars because they filmed it during the daytime, or there were lights that were shining. It was supposed to be a nighttime thing or whatever.
Right.
And they didn't want the reflection. So if you look closely, you won't see any glass in the back of it.
Right. You're exactly right.
Yeah. So how about that, Teddy? See, I was paying attention at one point.
At one point.
At one
Stubbed
point.
your toe and heard something. So
Hey, we still have a few minutes left. So
Okay.
thoughts about the doing business in a small rural community. You kind of touched on that. Any things that maybe surprised you about, I don't know, your role there? You were with the chamber for a number of years, but maybe pleasant surprise or maybe disappointment, things that didn't go the way you maybe thought they would.
Having left the chamber now, I can tell you the real story and not be worried that I'm going to lose my job. Right?
No, listening closer.
I'm a guy that grew up in an urban setting. I'm not from that town. 30 years in the business. I was excited, honored that I had the opportunity to work there. The community still has a viable tourism industry outside of Mayberry. Great wineries, Pilot Mountain State Park, rivers, hiking trails. If you're an outdoors person, it's a great place to be. So we still have manufacturing there, even though a lot of the manufacturers left or laid all their people off. It's not like Pittsburgh where you see a lot of steel plants just rusting. A lot of other, because of how the interstate runs down through Mount Airy in that part of North Carolina, it is a great place. Probably the biggest industry there is in metal fabrication now. You've seen these metal carports that are built near people's homes. They're made in Mount Airy. The parts are anyway.
Is that Justin? Can't remember the owner's name.
There are various ones now, but they refer to them as carports down here, and Carport Central or Carolina Carports. It's big industry here. The largest employer in Surry County, Mount Airy. Are you ready for this one? You guys got a guess for this? Any of your listeners know what the biggest employer in Surry County is?
The state government.
I'm
Take out the state government, the public schools, the private employer.
Turkey or chicken.
Tyson.
Ding, ding, ding.
Tyson.
Teddy gets the award. He gets the one-way.
Don, I think it is Wayne Foods. No,
Wayne, right?
I mean, they're
Wayne
a part
Farms.
of it. You know, they're the farmer.
Lisa and Don Masura. Don Masura listening. Don's a friend of mine. Don, if you're listening, love you, guy.
Don't encourage him, Randy. He'll jump on here and attack me. I'm joking.
Wayne Farms employs over 1,000 people in Dobson, taking live chicken and making it into packaged chicken.
Kind of figured that was the step, Randy.
There you go.
And he's the brains of the operation here.
There you go. Yeah. But small businesses are alive. Main Street is alive and well.
Here's one for you, Randy. See, I want to know if there's a CBD store in Mount Airy yet.
There have been some that have attempted to open. But did not open. And I'm not sure why. CBD is readily available. Also, the hemp business is fairly big. And there are hemp farmers in Surry County that are actually, growing it. I don't know too much about that industry, but there are people that love it and people that don't. It's a great place to do business. By the way, about 3,000 businesses in the county, in the city, in the Tower County. The chamber had about 600 members. So we were doing okay, but the culture there is different from a kid that grew up in the city. Frankly, it's not as diverse of a community that a kid from the city is used to. However, it's very family business connected and mostly small businesses. There are only 100 companies in Surry County. 50 companies that employ 100 or more.
Oh, really?
So, I mean, there's not where if you go to Winston, Greensboro, that's where the mega companies are. But absolutely.
Well, that's what attracted our show down here to Winston is that we would be with our peers of,
Absolutely. We've got a few minutes left. I'd be remiss if I didn't know you're a guitar aficionado. So what kind of tunes do you like to crank out?
Well, aren't you switch the gears there?
Have a little fun here. Yeah.
I have been a musician all my life. My father and grandfather were
Mhm.
musicians, and I tend to go to the mostly bluegrass side. I played acoustic guitar my whole life since I was a teenager. Played in a regional bluegrass band for many years. Enjoyed, opened up for some big acts. Found out there was no money in the music business. But I'm proud to own my father's Martin guitar. It's an interesting guitar because it was made for the bicentennial 1976. Martin calls it the D76, and there was only 1,976 of those guitars made, and I have one of them.
Gotcha.
And
Hey, I got one last one for you, and then I want to ask you for a real quick takeaway.
Sure.
You collect presidential memorabilia, right? So do you have a favorite piece of memorabilia? Maybe one, two, real quick. Anything that
I collect growing up in DC, I was given a lot of stuff, but specifically what I like are group photos of the presidents, which are rare. People may not know. Times in history where more than one or two presidents gathered is a rare occurrence. And I have a picture. It was taken at, Nixon's funeral. It was the last picture taken of Ronald Reagan and all the first ladies. And that picture, Bill Clinton signed that picture for me, because through the chamber world, I've been blessed to meet two presidents. I met Bill Clinton in March of 2000, and I met George W. Bush in 2006. And I've always been interested in the White House and the presidency, but I have no interest in running for office. I do it for fun, and it's a private collection. I also have items. If you flew Air Force One, I had a friend who was a crew chief on Air Force One. I have a coffee mug from, if you got coffee on Air Force One, they gave you a coffee mug. There you go.
And, well, I know you're not going to make it, you're not going to be a career politician, but I've got to think being an executive director of a chamber of commerce is, you've got to wear a lot of hats, and one of those says politics on it. So Randy Collins, I appreciate you joining us today. Randy's been our guest talking about Andy Griffith, Mayberry, all the ups and downs of being a chamber in a small rural community, but a lot of cool stories today. I'll give you 30 seconds or so to wrap up. Do you have something that maybe you didn't mention you want to work in about Andy Griffith, or just really anything?
Well, I would encourage people that have not been to this part of North Carolina, come and visit. And certainly if you are an Andy Griffith fan, as I said at the beginning of the show, if you don't do anything else, come to the Mount Airy and see the Andy Griffith Museum. Andy gave a lot of items from the show, including everything that was on his desk on set. He sat behind this wooden desk, as you recall. All of that was given to a friend of Andy's that lived here in Mount Airy. He kept it in storage and then donated it to the museum. Cool. You actually will see one of Andy's sheriff's shirts and his badge. People who love Andy Griffith and love the show must come to this museum. It is the only collection of Andy Griffith items. And a lady mentioned, real quick, about Matlock. Once the show ended, Andy had some success making some movies. He had done Matlock for many years, which was success. But one book that I read, Andy's biggest financial gain was not from the television show. Andy's
Ritz crackers.
Well, Ritz, I think, paid him a lot of money. Good cracker. But he recorded a gospel CD.
Oh, yes.
That went platinum. And Andy Griffith, God bless you, Andy, if you're listening, not the greatest voice in the world, but he sold more gospel CDs than many gospel bands did. And I just say thank you, Andy Griffith, for being a part of Mount Airy. And it's a great part of the world. Come, I invite everybody to come and visit.
Great. Thanks, Randy Collins.
Randy Collins, thank you.
Appreciate it. Teddy. You mean to tell about next week's guest? You can take us out here.
It's you and Abby in a conversation next week.
Abby Donnelly joins us. She has a new book out. We're going to talk that. Abby's been on the show before, and we're going to talk about succession planning. So if you're a senior exec, business owner, or even if you're in mid-level management, and what are you doing to groom your replacement to backfill so that the success of the organization is maintained? So Abby joins us next week. That'll be on the 15th, 11:55 Eastern time. So hope you can join us. Teddy.
Randy Collins, thanks for being on the show. Thank you to our audience, everybody who shows up and catches us on LinkedIn and Facebook and YouTube and podcast. Thanks to the Blackwell Captive Solutions for sponsoring the show. Ownership, peace of mind, price stability. You need to work with Blackwell in order to look at how you're managing your insurance and having that stopgap on your insurance. Randy W, see you later on. To our audience, see you. Randy C, thanks a lot.
Thank you now.